In the late 60s, Martin Seligman and his colleagues were doing research on classical conditioning, a process in which an animal or human associates one thing with another. Martin is an American psychologist, educator, and author of self-help books. He earned his bachelor's degree in physiology at Princeton and a PhD in psychology from the University of Pennsylvania in 1967. This is the time and place his foundational experiments and theory of learned helplessness began. 3 groups of dogs were used for this experiment, so if being mean to dogs really upsets you, this is your warning. The first group were put into a harness for a period of time. Nothing was done to them, and after a while they would be released. Group 2 was attached to the same harness and administered light shocks that the dog could stop if they pressed a button. The dogs in Group 3, however, were placed in the same harness and given the same shocks, but their buttons did nothing to stop it. Seligman was teaching them, rather effectively, that there was nothing they could do to escape the shocks. Once these 3 groups had completed their first experimental manipulation, all dogs were placed one at a time in a box with 2 chambers. In the side of the box they were placed in, the floor would administer similar shocks that all the dogs could escape if they jumped through the barrier to the safe side. This is where Seligman discovered the differences in behavior gained from the first part of the experiment. Dogs in Group 1 and 2 quickly discovered that they could escape the unpleasant feeling if they moved out of the chamber, but most of the dogs in Group 3 would simply lie down and whine while they were being shocked. Seligman wondered if the condition could be cured. He wanted to change the expectation that nothing could be done to alleviate stress. So he had colleagues demonstrate to the dogs and physically move their legs to try to get them to hop out of the electric chamber. They offered treats and rewards to the dogs, but even with a way to escape, a path shown, and rewards offered, dogs in Group 3 were unaffected. They had been conditioned to think there was nothing they could do to avoid the pain and gave up. The condition was labeled learned helplessness. Learned helplessness is demonstrated with much larger animals as well. An animal trainer will secure a baby elephant's leg to a post that it can't pull away from. The elephant will struggle for hours, even days, trying to escape, but eventually it'll quiet down and accept its situation. When the elephant grows up, it will remain secure to the post, even though it's clearly strong enough to pull free by now. It has learned there's nothing it can do. In 1974, this condition was tested on 3 groups of human participants. Group 1 subjected to loud, unpleasant noise that they could shut off if they pressed a button 4 times. Group 2 was given the same noise with a button that did nothing, and Group 3 was subjected to no sound at all. When Part 2 of the experiment came around and the subjects were placed in a room with a lever that would shut the sound off, participants from Group 2 generally didn't even try it. So what was the purpose of all this? What did we gain from learning the behavior of animals and people in different stressful situations? In 2011, an animal study claimed that animals with no control over stressful stimuli showed signs of social anxiety and depression. Seligman outlined 2 types of helplessness from his experiments. Universal helplessness is a sense of helplessness in which a subject believes nothing and no one can help them out of their situation. Personal helplessness is much more localized. The subject may believe that others can help them find a solution, but they are personally unable to do anything to alleviate their stress and pain. Both of these helplessness types can lead to a state of depression, but the quality of that depression may differ. Those suffering from personal helplessness are more likely to have low self-esteem, since others can solve what they cannot. Universal helplessness is a much more harsh impact on a person, since there's no escape in their mind.
I believe that we have become depressed. I believe that we have received so many conflicting signals, so much gaslighting, so much misinformation, so much incompetence. Sometimes the misinformation and the gaslighting really is incompetence, but it's funny how this incompetence ends up having the same effect. The total demoralization of the human population. People giving up. They won't jump over the knee-high fence. They won't do it, even if it's only a step away. They just will not do it. This is broad-scale depression. This is broad-scale numbing out. This is trauma. The human population is now sinking into trauma. We are going into shock. And as we go into shock and we sink deeper and deeper as a people, as a species, every day, the chances of us doing anything about this, to rebel, go down. Why? Because of learned helplessness. The more depressed and demoralized you are, the less likely you are to move. This is biological. This is mammalian. You don't even have to do it very long to somebody. You just give them conflicting information, cause them to believe that they're the source of their pain, cause them to believe perhaps even that their loved ones and their community are their own enemies, tell them things that aren't true, force them to repeat things that aren't true, communism writ small, force people to lie, force people to do things that they know are not right, and their spirits will break. Abusive relationships at the microcosmic level being mirrored at the government level. What does an abuser do? What does the narcissist, the psychopath, the VCP, the borderline do in an abusive and controlling relationship? Typically, they marinate their target in guilt. They marinate their target in shame. What is the effect of marinating a human being in guilt and in shame? Well, guilt and shame are corrosive elements, and they burn through boundaries. They burn through self-worth. They burn through morality. They burn through standards. They burn through everything. It is, aside from resentment, probably the most destructive emotions that a human being can feel. Guilt and shame. Resentment, yes, but guilt and shame are primary. Guilt and shame are primary. So if I can shame you, and I'm your boss, your father, your husband or boyfriend or whatever, and I'm abusing you, and I'm really taking you for a ride, I can always put my hands over your eyes and cover if I can make you feel guilty. I can always keep you distracted and stop you from seeing the truth if I can put guilt in your heart. If I can put guilt in here, I can stop these from working. I can stop these from working. I can cover your eyes. I can cover your ears, and I can get inside your head. This is the nature of abusive relationships at the microcosmic level. Do you really think there would be any difference at the macrocosmic level? They know what they're doing. They are sentimental to keep you feeling guilty and to keep you feeling ashamed. That's not compassion. That's about them. That's pure rank narcissism. Spot it, see it, name it, shame it. Know what it is. Don't fall for it. And you should feel this much guilt and this much shame. Do not be coerced. Do not let them manipulate your emotions anymore. Enough. Enough with this. It's disgusting. It's puke-inducing sentimentality. And it's also false. It's also false. You know why they're doing it? To guilt you, to shame you, to break your boundaries, to break your morality, to break your spirit, so that they can make you do what? Tell lies. To force you to tell things that you know perfectly well are not true. To further your humiliation. To further your servitude and submission and shame and guilt. How can you love yourself? How can you respect yourself when you're saying things you know perfectly well are not true? You can't. It's not possible. It's not possible. And so you go into learned helplessness. Most of the dogs who'd been in group 3, where for them the subjective experience was that they were shocked inexplicably for an unknown duration, and it just stopped, and they didn't know why. They had no agency. They had a completely externalized locus of control. Their response was different. The group 3 students, which had previously learned that nothing they did had any effect on the shocks, simply lay down passively and whined when they were shocked. This means that those that had been caused to believe that there was nothing they could do in a scenario where all they had to do was jump over the little knee-high fence. They didn't. They lay down and they cried. They lay down and cried and continued to be shocked. They didn't even try. In Seligman's hypothesis, the dogs do not try to escape because they expect that nothing they will do will stop the shock. Listen to this. In order to change the expectation, experimenters had to physically pick the dogs up and move their legs, replicating the actions the dog would need to take in order to escape from the electrified grid. So if you were a group 3 dog, you would just lie there and take it. And the experimenters, it doesn't say it here. It doesn't say it here. Oh no, it does say it here. They offered them food. They threatened them. They made loud noises. They're like, come here. And come on, get over there. Nothing would make these dogs move. They had to pick them up like they were puppies and take their feet and go, move your feet like this. To change the expectation, experimenters physically picked up the dogs and moved their legs, replicating the actions the dog would need to take in order to escape from the electrified grid. This had to be done, not once, but at least twice. So for some dogs, this took 3, 4, 5 times. So deep into learned helplessness and depression had they sunk, before the dogs would start willfully jumping over the barrier on their own. In contrast, threats, rewards, and observed demonstrations had no effect on the helpless Group 3 dogs. This is the essence of learned helplessness. Learned helplessness is almost like a biological state that a depressed mammal, any depressed mammal, will go into. I shouldn't say that. I'm not big on animal psychology. I know of many mammals who are capable of sinking into depression. Maybe it's not all. How? By receiving pain that they experience as external to their agency. And they just internalize the belief there's nothing they can do. Depression, I believe, should be understood as something mammalian, as something that is, we should explore the element of it that is physical and that is evolutionary and that is rooted in learned helplessness. If you are not involved, if you are not consulted, if you are not a part of the process, if you have no hand in it and there's nothing you can do, you should feel zero guilt. Zero guilt. And yes, I am talking about a broad range of topics here. There is no sane reason for a human being to feel guilty for something that they could not possibly stop. Maybe it's very far away in distance. Maybe it's very far away in the past. Make you feel guilty about something that's in the past or that's happening on the other side of the world, unless you have a time machine, in which case you should feel guilty because you could have stopped the terrible thing by going back in time. Unless you are the president of a country who has the power to go and stop the thing that's happening on the other side of the world, in which case you can feel guilty. Where there is no power, there is no responsibility, and you should feel this much guilt. Be clear, because right now you're being guilt-tripped. Oh, you're being guilt-tripped. But we're so depressed and so disconnected from each other and so disconnected from life, we don't even have the strength to just say no. And that's all it is. That's all it is. If everybody just says no, it's over. It's over. Instantly. Just say no. No, we're not doing that.